What's up guys, Tommy Bowyer here from Movie Rewind, and today I'll be reviewing Doctor Who Series 8. There will be spoilers in this review, so without further ado, let's get into it. So Doctor Who Series 8 stars Peter Capaldi as the 12th incarnation of the Doctor and Jenna Coleman as his companion Clara Oswald. It aired from the 23rd of August 2014 and concluded after 12 episodes on the 8th of November 2014. It's the fourth series to be under showrunner Steven Moffatt, and unlike its predecessors Series 6 and Series 7, it does not air in two parts, so it was a continuous run week on week. Series 8 is often described as the quote-unquote darker series of modern Who. And while I agree with that assessment to an extent, I wouldn't use the term darker. What I would say is that Series 8 is very mature. And I think it works considering the incarnation of the Doctor we have. Now, straight off, a series will succeed or fail depending on who you have playing the Doctor. And Peter Capaldi as the new 12th Doctor, one of the most talented actors they have ever had portraying that character. Capaldi's love for the programme is very well known. I remember when they announced and he did a Q&A session, and he's just over the moon about being in this programme. He loves Doctor Who and what it stands for. And you can tell throughout this series that he loved portraying this character. And the 12th Doctor is one of the most complex incarnations of the Doctor, especially in Series 8. A running theme throughout this series is whether the Doctor is a good man, and there are several instances during episodes of this series where you really question the motives of the Doctor. Does he actually have good intentions, or is he just an alien? Does he not have any idea about human empathy whatsoever? So I love that throughout this series you really do question the Doctor. It brings the Who into Doctor Who, if that's a really cringy thing to say. I also love the 12th Doctor and Clara. Jenna Coleman really made the role of Clara her own during Series 8. She was good during Series 7, but Series 8 she's just far superior. We get to learn more about Clara's life, her profession as a teacher, and how she has to balance being with the Doctor as well as her responsibilities as a teacher. So I really like the Doctor and Clara's relationship. They have a good banter between them, and there's also quite a lot of conflict between them too, which is also really interesting to see. Now, a character which is introduced in Series 8 is Danny Pink, who is Clara's love interest. Now, I don't really have a problem with Danny Pink. He's okay. I think more could have been done for this character and more attention could have been given to Clara and Danny's relationship. But by and large, he's an all-right character. He helps out in certain episodes. Now, the main storyline for Series 8 is the idea of this mysterious Missy character, and about all of these characters go into this paradise once they die, and there's all these questions over whether the afterlife really does exist and who is this Missy character. Now, I'd say most of us knew that Missy was the Master. It weren't that subtle. I think Moffat intended it to be quite a shock twist. It weren't. I think most people had realised what was going on. But saying that, the story arc is pretty good. It's set up throughout multiple episodes of the series, which is always a good thing because it keeps you invested in the episodes. So yeah, the story arc was okay. It was a standard Doctor Who story arc, but Moffat did a decent job with it. Now I'm going to go through each episode of this series in more detail and explain, for the most part, why I think we've got a decent bunch of episodes in Series 8. Deep Breath. The premiere of Series 8 and the first episode to have Peter Capaldi in the new role of the 12th Doctor. And it has to be said, the 12th Doctor fits in with relative ease. He won me round from the off. Peter Capaldi delivers a very funny and also complex incarnation of the Doctor, and that's made really clear within this first episode. I like Clara's story arc throughout this episode, where she begins to question whether she should actually stay with the Doctor or not. Does she actually feel what she felt for the 11th Doctor, or is he just too radically different for her to actually stay there? I like that we have Lady Vastra, Jenny and Strax in this episode for the simple reason it's good to see how the 12th Doctor differs from the 11th Doctor, and interacting with former companions from the 11th Doctor era is a good way of doing that. Plus I think the three really do help Clara come to terms with this regeneration and how she has to kind of stay with the Doctor if she wants to make a difference. Now the main thing about a regeneration storyline is you want a villain which doesn't outshine the Doctor in any way, but you don't want a bad villain. And the Clockwork Man, I think he's pretty good. He has some very sinister moments. I like how it's linked back to the Series 2 episode, The Girl in the Fireplace. I always like little Easter eggs like that. Doctor Who's always very good at that. The restaurant scene where the Clockwork Men aren't breathing and the Doctor and Clara realise it is a really tense scene. Practically the whole scene in the restaurant and then down into the basement is a really good scene. There's a lot of tense moments, especially when Clara tries to not breathe while walking past all of these Clockwork Men. You do really question the Doctor in this episode, especially when he appears to abandon Clara, and as well as that amazing scene where he's in the final battle with the Clockwork Man and he says, one of us is going to do something out of character. Either you're going to jump or I'm going to push you. And that was a great scene. I've seen this episode a lot of times and I'm still on the edge of my seat during that scene because the performances from Capaldi is just so strong. Now, one aspect of this episode, which I didn't realise until researching it, is quite controversial, is the inclusion of Matt Smith's 11th Doctor in a phone conversation with Clara, where he basically says, Clara, I'm still the same man. I'll be very scared as the 12th Doctor. You need to stay with me and support me. And I've seen a lot of people say that it takes the attention away from Capaldi's 12th Doctor. Now, I don't think it does that. Considering Clara travelled with the 11th Doctor, it makes sense that the only person who's going to convince her to give the new Doctor a chance is the Doctor. So I actually thought it was quite a touching scene, which kind of concluded Matt Smith's era as the 11th Doctor, but also welcomed Peter Capaldi's era as the 12th Doctor. So overall, deep breath, really intense episode, very good villain, and also introduces a great incarnation of the Doctor. Into the Dalek is one of those episodes which once again questions whether the Doctor is a good man or not. Throughout this episode, we see that the Doctor is basically saying to Clara, am I a good man? And Clara can't really answer that question because she doesn't know. She still doesn't really know this incarnation of the Doctor, much like the viewers. So viewers would have been questioning this incarnation of the Doctor as well. It introduces Rusty, who's a rogue Dalek who's decided that the Daleks' plan is just ridiculous and that the Daleks are actually in the wrong. Now, I like Rusty. It's a different spin on a Dalek story, and considering we have like a Dalek story every single series now, this was quite a unique one. Having the Doctor and Clara shrink to enter a Dalek to try and figure out why it's gone rogue is a really interesting concept. We have the Dalek antibodies in there. We've been introduced to kind of mechanical antibodies before, but these were pretty good. They provided some tense chase scenes, which is always needed with an episode like this. I really like the final twist of how the Doctor tries to change Rusty's mind and say, look at all the beauty of the universe, read my thoughts, look at all what I've seen. And then, because the Doctor's hatred of the Daleks is so intense, that just makes Rusty decide even more that the Daleks need to be destroyed. And I think that's a really interesting twist, especially as those final scenes with the Doctor saying to Rusty, you looked into my heart and you saw hatred. That's not a good thing. So this episode really does make you question the Doctor. But once again, Capaldi's Doctor is acted really well. Capaldi once again gives a solid performance in his second episode. We also get introduced to Danny Pink for the first time. He's not very well developed though, apart from knowing that he's a teacher and ex-soldier who now works with Clara. Apart from that, we don't really know that much about him. I mean, he's likeable. This episode doesn't really develop him that much, to be honest. Robot of Sherwood. Now, it is incredibly hard to do camp and make it work, but for some reason with this episode they pull it off. Now, the guy who portrays Robin Hood is great. He's got the perfect balance of heroism, charm, and also he's quite comical as well, which is always a good thing. This episode is not taken too seriously, but it kind of works. I mean, Robin Hood is an urban legend, you know, no one really knows if Robin Hood existed or not. So this episode kind of makes the most of the kind of fairy tale elements. It does actually make a decent episode. I like a lot of the set designs, the costume designs. It really does feel like medieval England. The sheriff, who is the main villain they introduce, I like how they have a sci-fi twist of the sheriff working with robots that want to help him take over the world. I think that's an interesting way to introduce sci-fi elements to this episode. The final sword fight between Robin Hood and the sheriff is actually very well choreographed, and it was quite a swashbuckling adventure, which is always nice to see. One aspect of this episode which does bother me a tiny bit is the rivalry between Robin Hood and the Doctor. Now, I didn't mind it at first. Their fight on the wooden log over the river was pretty funny. But after a while, it really does feel like the Doctor's just being a bit childish. He's being very petty with Robin Hood. And that bothered me a little. I mean, they make it up in the end, but it was just a little annoying seeing the Doctor act like this, because it's like, come on, just grow up. You don't need to be this petty. But overall, Robot of Sherwood, it's a fun episode, as long as you don't take it too seriously. Listen, one of those episodes which gives us a lot of background knowledge on Danny Pink, as well as the Doctor. Now, this is Moffatt doing a darker script at his best. Moffatt is very good at writing darker and more mature Doctor Who content, and Listen is a prime example of that. He introduces a creature which has adapted to hiding, so nobody knows what this creature looks like, and sometimes it's the things you don't see which have the biggest impact. The scene in which Clara and the Doctor and a young Danny are in his room and this creature is under the blanket, that is a really tense scene. You can feel shivers going down your spine, because obviously they have to just turn away and not let this creature be seen. And it's just such a fantastic scene. It's great writing and direction from Moffatt. He really does a good job. I like how we're introduced to a young Danny, because it gives Clara a chance to understand Danny as a character more, which is always good to see. Danny needed some development, so this episode provides it. We learn more about his time as a child and how he didn't have the best childhood in the world and why he would have been drawn to the army. So I think that was really interesting to see. The Doctor is very intense during this episode, and the scene in which Clara goes back to the Doctor's childhood and kind of comforts him shows that this creature has had the Doctor obsessed for most of his life. And it's a great scene when they travel to the end of the universe, that the Doctor doesn't care about living or dying. He just wants to be able to see this creature just once. That is once again a very tense scene. This episode has a lot of tense scenes in it, which I think make it that much better for me. I think it has a heartwarming ending as well, with Clara hugging the Doctor and also making amends with Danny. I think Clara acts very mature throughout this episode, which is always great to see. It's nice to see a companion grow into the role. And this episode proved to me that Clara really has grown since she first entered the TARDIS. Time Heist is a very underrated episode. To be honest, probably in my top 10 Doctor Who episodes of all time. Now, if an episode can't get you hooked from the start like this one, I don't know what can. You have the Doctor answering the TARDIS phone, and then before we know it, it cuts to the Doctor, Clara, and 2 hours in a secured room, being told by a mysterious figure that they have to rob one of the most secured banks in the universe. Now, if that isn't good setup for an episode, I don't know what is. This episode has a very spy thriller feel to it, and I'm all there for it. There's a lot of scenes in this when you're hoping that they can all pull off this heist, and that's just great. We're introduced to this creature known as the Teller, who can basically smell out guilt and then punish you for it. And that's a great idea. This creature has a great design. His method of killing is brutal. And the fact that the Doctor, Clara, and the other two have to try and outrun this creature is great to see. There's a very tense moment when Clara is targeted by the teller, and you're on the edge of your seat because you honestly think that this is the end for Clara. Fortunately it weren't, but I really did feel at certain points when I first saw this episode that Clara was being killed off, and that really was shocking for me. Now the other two characters we're introduced to who work to try and pull this heist off, they're developed quite well to make their apparent deaths meaningful. I also like the plot twist in this episode because there's quite a lot of plot twists in this episode. We eventually find out that the woman in charge of the bank organised this plot in order to test her own security systems. And then we learn a further plot that this woman, decades later on her deathbed, decides to phone up the doctor and say, right, you were right all along, you need to help me free this teller. Because this teller creature is actually an actual creature. He has like a partner, and he's being held against his will. So I thought it was great that this woman, in the years following this episode, decided that she was wrong and that only the doctor could help her make things right. And then we learn even more, as the twists continue, that the Doctor organised this bank heist in order to get everyone there at the same time. Now, this episode is a little difficult to follow, so I can understand why some people don't like it. For me, I think the plot twists all work. It's a very interesting episode, which I've watched it loads of times. And I can even watch it again now and see stuff which I didn't see before. And that's when you know you've got a good episode of Doctor Who. So yeah, Time Heist, incredibly underrated. The Caretaker. The Doctor goes undercover at Clara's school as a caretaker in order to stop an alien. This plot has been done before, quite a few times now. Now, this episode isn't exactly bad, but it's not that good either. It's kind of an average episode of Doctor Who. I like how we see more of Clara and Danny together and kind of start to understand their relationship. The actors do have decent chemistry, so they do sell this relationship for me. It's interesting to see how Danny reacts to the realisation that Clara is a companion to the Doctor. And it's interesting how Danny calls the Doctor out as being simply a general, that he'll sit back, he'll let other people risk their lives for him. And that's interesting because obviously the Doctor hates being seen as any kind of authority figure. He doesn't like the military in any way, shape or form. So it's interesting to see Danny question the Doctor, basically saying to Clara, I know men like him. I know exactly what they expect from people and what sacrifices they expect people to make. So that was very interesting. That conflict between the Doctor and Danny did work quite well. Now, The Caretaker is not a bad Doctor Who episode, but it's nothing original. It's not unique like Time Heist or Into the Dalek are. It's kind of just there. Decent performances and an interesting plot, but just average. That's all I can really say, really. Just average. Kill the Moon. Good ideas, but bad concept. Now, the idea of the moon being a giant egg, pretty dumb. Not that believable, to be honest with you. They kind of save it with the commentary. I like how the Doctor is trying to show Courtney, who is a girl from Clara's school, that, you know, she is special and she can be something if she puts her mind to it. That's interesting. It shows a nicer side to the Doctor, which we don't get a lot of in Series 8, it has to be said. But I love when you seriously question the motives of the Doctor, as he just leaves. He basically says, look, you've got to decide whether you're going to blow up the moon or let this creature hatch. And then he just gets in his TARDIS and goes. He says, it's up to you, you're humanity, I can't make the decision for you, you have to make it yourself. And that puts Clara in a very difficult decision. Now, she asks humanity have a vote, and typical humanity, they choose for killing the creature. Because that's the first thing humanity would do in this situation. They wouldn't take any risks. They would decide, well, we need to just kill this creature straight away. And it's good from all the time Clara has spent with the Doctor that she finally realises, no, we shouldn't kill this creature. So she decides, no, we're not setting off the nukes, this creature lives. And then it turns out in a kind of anticlimax that this creature, you know, weren't going to cause any trouble and it hatched a new egg. So nothing changed. The Earth still has the moon. So this episode, it kind of doesn't actually mean anything. The Doctor wouldn't have had to be there and nothing would have changed whatsoever. Apart from the commentary over humanity having to make its own decisions and Clara being very upset that the Doctor didn't let her into what was actually going on, there's not much to offer with this episode. There are some spooky scenes on the moon. We're introduced to these spider creatures and the web atmosphere does make it a little creepy. But by and large, this episode is one of those episodes where the Doctor didn't really have to do anything and the outcome would have been the same. So I'm not saying I don't like this episode. I think it's got some good ideas. But just the concept of the moon being an egg is just too way out there. Even for Doctor Who. Mummy on the Orient Express. My favourite 12th Doctor story, it has to be said. This episode just oozes class. I love the atmosphere and idea of the Orient Express in space. And the actual concept of this episode is very terrifying. We're introduced to this mummy, which has a great design, and it kills people in 31 seconds, which means that there's a lot of tense scenes, because as soon as you see that countdown appear, you know that this mummy's coming to kill someone. So you're on the edge of your seat for a large part of this episode, and that's always great to see. The 12th Doctor fits in very well to this murder mystery plot, which I really enjoy because as a viewer you can kind of try and guess what's going on and who's behind it. A number of the side characters such as Perkins, the Captain and the Professor are actually properly developed, so you feel something when these characters are at risk of dying. I love how halfway through this episode the whole idea changes, because it actually turns out that someone wants to know what this mummy creature is and what can be done to stop it. So they got some of the best and brightest people in the world on this train and basically told them, right, solve this problem. If you don't, then this mummy is going to end up killing you. And that's really interesting because it adds a lot of tension to this episode and further deepens this murder mystery plot. And the actual outcome, I think, is pretty clever. It turns out that the mummy is draining people of their energy and it's actually just a soldier fighting against its will. So the mummy's not actually doing anything wrong, it's just doing what it's being told to against its will. So that was a really interesting outcome. We've kind of seen this before in Series 6 when they had a Minotaur who was killing people against their will. But Mummy on the Orient Express does do it better. I think it's something to do with the setting, it's with the 12th Doctor as well, and just the actual mystery plays out a lot better than the Series 6 one does. Also, a big part of this episode is the Doctor and Clara. Obviously, at the end of Kill the Moon, Clara decided she didn't want to travel with the Doctor anymore, so the Doctor says, well, come with me one last time. And then there's some interesting dialogue between the two, when Clara just kind of says to the Doctor, why do you have to keep stuff from me? And the Doctor's like, I have to, in order to have the best chance of saving everyone, I have to keep stuff from everyone except myself. And I think that was really interesting. I think Clara finally saw the Doctor in a new light, and that's when their companionship, which at several moments during this series had been on a knife edge, that really kind of consolidated them as a proper Doctor and companion duo. So yeah, Mummy on the Orient Express is a really good episode. The plot is great, the murder mystery keeps you on your toes, there's plenty of tense moments, and also some great dialogue between the Doctor and Clara as well. Flatline. I have a soft spot for Flatline. I think it's a pretty fun time. Much like Robot of Sherwood, if you don't take it too seriously. Now the idea of Flatline is these creatures from another universe are killing people, and there's some interesting commentary over the Doctor trying to communicate with these creatures and try and understand, do they actually want to kill people, or are they just mistakenly killing people without realising it because they're not three-dimensional creatures, they're two-dimensional creatures. So that's quite interesting. I'd say the problem with this episode is the side characters. Apart from Rigsy, who helps the Doctor and Clara, the rest are just disposable. I mean, the ones who survive is one of those classics, the good people didn't survive, it was the worst people who actually survived. But most of these characters are just disposable. They're there to be killed off and show how threatening the creatures are. So yeah, the side characters are not that interesting. the stuff with the Doctor shrinking, because in this episode the TARDIS shrinks and the Doctor's stuck in this TARDIS. It's quite funny, mostly because of the interactions between the Doctor and Clara. If it weren't for them two having good banter, I don't think that concept would have been as funny as it was. I also like how the Clara basically has to take on the role of the Doctor for quite a bit of this episode. And that leads to a great final scene where the Doctor basically says to Clara, yes, you were good as me, but that's not necessarily a good thing. So I think it showed Clara getting quite arrogant and well suited to being in charge, which is obviously something which would become more dangerous as time went on. For the most part, Flatline is a fun episode. I don't take it too seriously, so I can enjoy it a lot more. It does have some decent chase scenes. What lets it down, I think, is the side characters. They're just there to be killed off. In the Forest of the Night. Oh. Now, Series 8 is a good series. In the Forest of the Night is the only terrible episode in that series. Now, you remember when I said we've killed the moon, that it's one of those episodes where the Doctor didn't have to be there and nothing would have changed. Well, that's exactly what In the Forest of the Night is. The basic idea is all these trees shoot up overnight, and nobody knows why. And then it turns out that these trees are just protecting Earth from a solar flare, and then they all disappear. So it's just the trees protecting the Earth. Pretty dumb. One of those episodes where the Doctor didn't need to do a lot. He didn't even really need to be there. He's just kind of there to talk to some school kids. And saying that the school kids, their acting leaves a little bit to be desired, and it does take you out of this episode. Now, I don't mind an episode which doesn't take itself too seriously, but this episode is just boring. There's not a lot going on. Even the conversations between Clara and Danny, and you got to admit, we're getting close to the finale, so when Clara's saying to Danny, I love you, it should mean something. But to be honest, those two relationship, it hasn't had the best development. Like, I think more could have been done. So that I love you, for me, doesn't make a lot of sense, because, you know, it doesn't feel like they know each other enough to really call it love yet. So yeah, In the Forest of the Night, just not that great, really. Just not that great. The only interesting thing about it is when Danny says to Clara, right, you need to decide, do you want to be with me or do you want to go off with the Doctor? So yeah, apart from that, very boring episode and dull as hell. Darkwater. We're heading into the 2-part finale, and Darkwater is a pretty decent setup which will get you excited for the final episode of the series. This episode does get off with a bang, with Danny Pink being killed, being run over by a car, and then that's it, he's gone. And it's great to see Clara grieve. Jenna Coleman, throughout most of this episode, is the standout. She gives an incredible performance as someone in denial when in grief. And there's very tense scenes where she basically threatens the Doctor. She says, I'm going to throw all your TARDIS keys into lava if you don't bring Danny back. And obviously the Doctor can't do that. He can't rewrite such personal history, which will have a massive impact on Clara. So he says, no, I can't do that. And Clara's like, well, if you don't, then you will never enter your TARDIS again. So it actually turns out that the Doctor had the upper hand, put Clara in a dream state to see how far she would go. And it turns out, yep, she'd go pretty far. So that's a concerning development, that Clara would be prepared to go that far to be with Danny Pink again. And then throughout most of this episode, we have this mysterious character of Missy, portrayed brilliantly by Michelle Gomez. Very funny, but also quite sadistic and sinister as well, which is always good. Pretty obvious that Missy is the master, I have to be honest. That was pretty obvious. Saying that though, I did not expect to see the Cybermen pop up. They did a good job there, because this dark water fluid can basically preserve organic material but doesn't show anything artificial. So when you see all these skeletons in these water tanks, when the water's gone, it actually turns out they're Cybermen. That was a pretty clever twist, I have to admit. And there's great imagery with all the Cybermen coming out of St. Paul's Cathedral and kind of all taking over London. I think that's got some quite good imagery there. And it does have a good cliffhanger with Missy revealing that she is the master, even though I would say it was pretty predictable and quite obvious at the time that Missy was going to be the master. Darkwater is a good build-up. It's a lot of expedition, But that's not a bad thing. It's kind of comes across in an interesting way, and some of the ideas, especially with the Dark Water stuff, is pretty unique. So yeah, this Dark Water is a decent episode. It really does set up for the finale very well. Plus, I think Jenna Coleman gave a great job as a grieving Clara Oswald. Death in Heaven. It's not the greatest finale in the world, but it's still pretty solid, it has to be said. The one problem I have with this episode, I'm going to get the problems out of the way from the off, is that the Cybermen are able to fly. They look like Iron Man, and I've never liked that. Now, I understand for plot purposes the Cybermen need to be able to fly in order to blow up in the atmosphere, so then this cyber pollen can go on graves and basically bring the deceased back as Cybermen. So I understand why it's needed for plot purposes, but I've never liked the idea of the Cybermen being able to fly. They just come across as too robotic and too much like Iron Man. So now the problems are out of the way, let's get into the good stuff. A lot of this episode involves scenes between the Doctor and Missy, and to be honest, Peter Capaldi and Michelle Gomez are great on screen together. They bring those characters to life. You can see how much kind of bile there is between both of them, but also a kind of strange level of appreciation of one another, because obviously they go back a long time, back to their childhood. So there are some great scenes between them which really bring this episode up the ranking. When we are not seeing scenes between the Doctor and Missy, we have scenes between Clara and Danny Pink. Danny Pink becomes a rogue Cyberman because his love for Clara is so strong that it can't be crushed, so he ends up trying to be with Clara and try and find a way to say goodbye to her, which does lead to quite a lot of emotional and heartwarming scenes. We have Unit under Kate Stewart reintroduced for this episode, which is a good idea because it gives the Doctor some technical support, though saying that the Doctor being Earth's president is so out there it could only work in the world of Doctor Who. Now, where this episode really picks up is the final graveyard scene. And I've always liked this scene because the performances from everyone involved is just on point. You have Clara and Danny having a very emotional goodbye. I love that scene where Clara just hugs Danny in silence. It's just one of those scenes where no words are required. It's just a really emotional scene which tugs at your heartstrings. And then we have Missy offering the Doctor a chance to command the Cybermen army. And this is a great scene which really does bring all of the series themes together. The idea of the Doctor, is he a good man or not, is really there with this decision, because as we know, the Doctor has been seen throughout this series to have a lot of hatred in his soul, and a lot of people have questioned the Doctor's motives in the episodes of Series A. So is the Doctor going to command this Cyberman army? Of course not. The Doctor says, I am the Doctor, I'm not commanding this army. And I think it was good that he gave it to Danny, so Danny can instruct all of the Cybermen to self-destruct. It did end Danny's story arc in a very heroic way, which is always a good thing. Danny may not have been the most developed character, but he did get a good send-off, which at the end of the day is the main thing. Now, the final scene between the Doctor and Clara in the cafe, I think was the perfect way to end Series 8, because it kind of ends on a cliffhanger. Because the Doctor seems to think that Danny can be brought back, but obviously Danny's so heroic that he doesn't want to be brought back. He brings back someone who he let down when he was in the army. So Clara decides that she has no excuse now to travel with the Doctor. But the Doctor thinks that she shouldn't make a decision between him or Danny. So the Doctor decides to lie and say, look, I found Gallifrey, because a lie that Missy gave him was coordinates for Gallifrey, saying that she'd found it. So the Doctor basically lies to Clara and says, look, I found Gallifrey, I'm going back there, so, you can stay with Danny and have a good life. And because Clara doesn't want to hurt the Doctor's feelings, she decides to just go along with it and say, oh yeah, that's fine by me. And there is some great scenes when the Doctor goes to the coordinates that Missy told him to find that Gallifrey is not there. The Doctor's meltdown in the TARDIS, once again, is one of those scenes where no words are required, because you can just see through Capaldi's visual acting how devastated the Doctor is over not being able to find Gallifrey. And that did bring a tear to my eye, I have to admit, because the one thing the Doctor has always wanted is to return home. And to see him come so close but yet so far was very heartbreaking to watch. Death in Heaven is a decent series finale. It has small problems. It might not stand out as much as other series finales, but it's still solid. Mostly because of the performances involved and also some of the writing done by Moffatt. So in conclusion, Doctor Who Series 8 was a breath of fresh air when it first came out in 2014, and time has not lowered my opinion of this series in the least. Now, Doctor Who Series 8 is the first proper mature series of Doctor Who, and I think that is why it succeeds. Now, I was 14 when this series came out. I was ready for maturer themes, and that's exactly what Series 8 offers. Now, one of the things which makes Series 8 such a high quality series is the performances of Peter Capaldi as the 12th Doctor and Jenna Coleman as Clara Oswald. These two work really well together. There's a good dynamic between them, there's plenty of banter and funny moments, but also quite serious discussions as well, which are, of course, what makes Doctor Who the success it is. Capaldi brought a very complex version of the Doctor, a questionable Doctor who, throughout this series, you question whether this Doctor is a good man or not. What Capaldi and Moffatt did with Series 8 is create a Doctor who really was an unknown entity. He did bring back the Who in Doctor Who. I like Clara's story arc throughout this series. We see more of her life outside the TARDIS with her profession as a teacher. Now, her relationship with Danny Pink, more development could have been done there. Saying that though, it does have a good finale, with Danny sacrificing himself to save humanity. It is what Danny deserved. I just wish that they had more development with that character and his relationship with Clara. Michelle Gomez as Missy knocked it out of the park. She was amazing as that character, and the story arc throughout this series over Missy's mystery, yes, it was pretty obvious Missy was the master, but saying that, the story arc was pretty solid, and the finale, once again, was a solid finale. Now, in terms of absolute episodes, Series 8 has outstanding ones, such as Deep Breath, Time Heist, and Mummy on the Orient Express, and the only poor episode I can see is In the Forest of the Night. Even average episodes, such as Kill the Moon, Flatline, and The Caretaker, are still fun and enjoyable to watch. So Series 8, by and large, is a strong series of Doctor Who. I think after the kind of triumphal nature of the 50th, we needed a series which was really going to stay in people's heads, and I think Series 8 does that quite a lot. So overall, I would give Series 8 a well-deserved gold ranking. Honestly, Series 8 is one of my personal favourite series. It's more mature, it's darker, it has a great incarnation of the Doctor, and some of the episodes are my personal favourite. So thanks for watching, guys. I really do hope you enjoyed my Series 8 review. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe in order to receive great and maybe even improved quality content in the future. Now, this is the final Doctor Who series review of the year. Hooray! We started off earlier this year with the Tennant specials, and we're now well into Capaldi's era, so hopefully by this time next year I should be in to the Jodie Whittaker era, which is a little bit more questionable. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in another one. See ya!